So it's very rare that I just sit down and completely start breaking down a problem. I usually attack it by using a ton of console logs and trying to get a good idea of what I'm dealing with. But here we can obviously just exit out of this expression, simply understanding that these values are going to evaluate to correct. If you did want to try and figure this out on your own, um, over here we know for a fact that this amount would need to be greater than z because it says that this must resolve to true, right? Or a must be greater to b. So if we look at all the other places, so a is used down here, so we have to keep that in mind. Let's see, b, is b used anywhere else? No. So even this expression would actually evaluate to true. This is pretty easy. So if you break it apart and go line by line, this actually isn't that bad. This one I think evaluates to false. This is saying 0 or the array of 0 and n. I don't really necessarily consider that a valid expression, so I think that the top one is really coming down to those first two expressions right here. Oops, I brought up my dictionary. So these two expressions are the only ones we're evaluating because this one on the right doesn't necessarily make any sense. And we can tell because if we actually wrote that out, 0 or an array of one item that is a string of 0 and, oops, and, I cannot draw ampersands, and 0. So let's console log that. Let's figure that out. If we were by ourselves, like I said, we're trying to do console logs. If we console.log 0 or array string 0 and, wait, that evaluates in the parentheses, correct? Yes. So let's do that. PEMDAS and 0. There you go. So all I did was take all of our values that so far have worked in the top. So right now we have y and z and x. So x plus y is 1. That's definitely greater than 0. Cool. A is directly equal to b. A is definitely directly equal to b. So right now, if we're just focusing on the first problem, this is all we need, right? We just need that left side on the first expression to be greater than the right, which we're accomplishing by simply incrementing x by 1. And then here, this is actually also true, just by the simple fact that at this current point, all we need is zeros here. We're just focusing on this first expression for now. And then like I said, with experience, you'll start to recognize things like this, but I immediately recognize this as being an invalid expression because the OR operator needs to be used with some sort of expression. That's why we have them here in between these two spots, right? Because we want this, if you imagine this as being wrapped in an if statement, if I said if, and I plug that in there, that looks really gross, but the point is these OR operators are separating expressions that could all evaluate to true, and that would trigger our conditional to return true. So for all intents and purposes, if all we ever got was this to be true, just this left side, if we weren't able to get A to equal B, that would still be okay because we're using OR operators. Essentially, once the computer finds a match, it just is like, cool, you did it. Well, okay, right? This is what the computer is reading at the current moment. It's not evaluating all of those other OR statements because since they're OR statements, they aren't specifically conditional or like exclusive to one another. As long as one of those statements separated by the OR operators are true, it will return true. So even if the other two were false, if this first expression was true, it would evaluate to true and vice versa. Ordering doesn't matter. So if this statement evaluated to true, it would still come out as true. It doesn't matter that these two are false in the front. This or statement in here would be true as long as one of those statements, expressions is true. Okay, so let me see. We confirmed X, Y, and Z. This one we haven't confirmed yet. I will just erase that. Have we done N? Yeah, we threw a 0 in there. Oh, well, actually we did do that, but let's just say for the sake an L. L is 0, so A, B, L, M, cool. So like, I'm just doing this as if I was approaching this problem for the first time. So the first statement should be true. So this next one's a doozy. Double not operator and X plus Y plus Z and A should evaluate to false. So, that's an interesting one. This one would be definitely one where I would just brute force it and kind of see what works. As a matter of fact, I just erased that array. Let's see. Yeah, so this last one is evaluating to false because I changed M from an array for an example to show the example. But we can see here now, all I did, the only way I got these numbers so far is I just did this expression up here doing the minimal amount of work. Only using zeros and ones, we can get both of these statements to evaluate to true. So why would we complicate it by making this like 500 and then this one is 10, this one's 20? Like even if it evaluates to true, why would you make it more complicated on yourself? You're trying to solve a problem, you're not trying to create one. So using the most basic, smallest numbers, we were able to, right there, get these both to evaluate to correct. So the third one. Now, this kind of goes back to what I was saying before. We discovered in this first expression that this farther right expression is actually ignored because it can never be true, as I showed here. Once I remember how to get my console up, we got an output of 0 from this statement once I actually evaluated it. So that's never going to be false. That's a different data type altogether. So actually, now we can return L, M, and N to the pool. So if because we don't need these anymore, right? As a matter of fact, hopefully I don't get any errors. If I do, I might just like throw them in strings or something. Yeah, let's do this. Let's try this out. This should still work. We're right by the airport, in case you forgot. See? So knowing that this expression never actually gets evaluated, this rightmost one, because it's an invalid expression, we have these returned to our pool, and then knowing that we have these first two set, all we really have to do is make this last third expression resolve to true using M and N. So if we're looking at M, we see that it's referenced with brackets, which means it either is an object or it's an array. We call .length on it, which is an array method, so now we know it's an array. And then we're saying plus n is going to triple equals 1. So at what spot in an array plus itself could possibly equal 1? Exactly, because arrays start at 0. If there's only one item in the array, then the length is 1. So if at the 0 index of this array, the dot length called upon it returns 1, then 1 plus 0 is going to equal 1. And so here.
What blows my mind is you got everything you just said out of that.
Yep. It's important to remember it's kind of like the process of elimination, and it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around this at first, but as I said, the biggest telltale here is that I knew that this would never evaluate to true, yes. So since it specifically asks us to do that, I knew that this would never ever actually be read by the computer, and that's what I just showed you guys by just declaring these as empty. So this I knew could be true because we just entered in simple values, 0. If I was to go through and enter zeros in here and just try to get this to work, this would still work, right? 0 is equal to 0. It's very basic, very easy to understand. This one we got to work because all we did was just throw a 1 in here, right? So this is going to be true, and this is going to be true. Great. So we don't really want to get rid of A and B since we know that's going to be true. We don't know if we want to get rid of that yet, and we don't want to get rid of X, Y, and Z because we know those are going to be true. But since we know that this is never going to be true, we can return those to the pool of variables that we can use to further help us with this problem. And so, again, I didn't even look at this expression. All I did was, let's just see where we're at. And when I ran the test after completing the first one, just using zeros and ones, we still got should resolve to false. So right now, we're doing okay. We've confirmed that M needs to be an array. So actually, yes, it does. I believe you could just throw in a 0. I think before we did a, oh wait, it does have a, let's see. Am I doing this right?
Yep.
So what it's doing is it's going to the M array at the 0 index. All arrays start at 0. We're calculating the length of the string. So I lied. Earlier, I thought that this dot length meant that it was an array, but since we're calling the 0 index on the array, we're not actually calling an array method. We're hitting the data at the 0 index of this array, which results in this string of 0. So in reality, we're not actually using this. I think we're just using the actual string length itself. So I should be able to just put in a U there and have it still work, which it does. Because I'm calling the dot length method on this character, and dot length is a string method. If I type in dot length string method, Java. That's funny, I've been looking at Java stuff all day, and now everything is Java. The Illuminati. All right. So here, this is what I'm calling. I'm not calling the array method. I'm calling the string method. But don't get this confused. There is the exact same method in arrays. What was I just looking at? Dot length? Right here. So strings and arrays do have the same exact method that does the same exact thing, but just keep in mind that with different data types, there are some slight differences. So with this, I realized that it had to be some sort of array or object, and since it was calling dot length, I figured might as well start with an array. I mean, I actually got the answer from Mary, but don't tell anybody that. And then once we're calling yeah, trying to think. As a matter of fact, maybe this would work still. Yeah, because strings can be accessed with brackets. You can think of strings kind of like arrays. I think the computer treats them actually very similarly, as weird as that is. But again, this is kind of confusing. So I will pull up the console to show exactly what's going on here. So if I console.log, and I'll just put in, let's see, 0, 0, 0, 0. Oops, get rid of that last one. Dot length. See how it auto completes for me. And even though I misspelled that, it didn't pick that up. And then I do, oh, I probably will need a variable. Var hello equals hello, and then I console log hello at 1. Yeah, So this might error out because of my weird thing right there. This should work. You see that? E? This is all we have right here. All I did was use bracket notation on this variable, and just like an array, on the first index, I got the second letter. So strings also start at the 0 index, and you can also reference strings with bracket notation. Yeah. And then, yeah. So now what we're doing on this left side over here, this is what we're doing. Dot length, 1. That's how we're arriving at this third one being correct, with this being a string. So as a matter of fact, this doesn't even need to be a character. I mean, technically space is still a character, but, you know, to us normal people, it looks like there's nothing there, but there is indeed something there. It's just the Unicode character of space, and that's how you would end up solving that problem. Obviously, knowing methods off the top of your head would help a little bit, but really it's just a process of elimination and just brute forcing. I call it, where you console log your variables, and you are consistently trying different things, not really caring about the errors you're getting. That's not how you want to work all the time, but I think for getting a good idea of what you're working with, it helps a lot if you just keep trying the problem over and over and over again and just seeing what you get out of it, because you never know. You're never going to solve the problem unless you try. So you might as well try at every stage and see what you get in return, because sometimes you get a nice surprise like I did on that second one, where it just so happened that it already ended up being false anyway. Are there any other ones that people wanted to go over? Ones that we were struggling with? We can go over a couple of these, because a lot of these kind of go over different things that people might not realize or consider. So if somebody got stuck on a problem, I think it helps a lot, because, you know, some other people might not be there yet, and it will help them. Or if you're just struggling and you just don't know why this isn't working, you know, bringing it up and allowing other people to get eyes on it will help you out a lot, in my opinion.
I'm still struggling with parameters, but I want to work on that tonight and tomorrow.
Sure. I will say, don't forget with parameters, you can set default values. So if I wanted this string to always be equal to a specific string if I didn't enter anything in here, then what I would do is I would declare this kind of like a variable. So as a matter of fact, let me show you in the console. So let me think here. Function tester, we're going to put in num1, and then we're going to put in num2 equal to 2. Return, whoa, it's like Swedish. Return num1 plus num2, right? So now if I call this tester with 1, I get 3. Even though I put 2 parameters here, I set this parameter to be equal to 2 if it's not entered in otherwise. So that's not to say that we can't type in 2 arguments. It's just that if we wanted there to be a default set hard-coded fallback in case somebody didn't enter in a parameter, you would do this syntax right here. This would be like initializing parameters, or yeah, that's probably the best way to put it, initializing your parameters. So that being said, I believe if we do this, this should error out. Yeah. See that? Because I didn't initialize num2. I did the same thing I did up here. Up here, all I did was initialize num2. Down here, I did not.
What happens if you initialize num1 but not num2?
Then it would evaluate the other way. So Oh no, you know what you need to do? Well, is I believe you would need to leave like an empty space. I might need to put null here. Yeah. I never actually tried this. Why are you giving me problems? Let's try that. There we go. Yeah. That's why null is useful, by the way. Because obviously if I called that with 0, that would be different. Oh, actually, it looks like it's still overridden. Yeah, so if you put null in place of a initialized parameter, it seems that it just overwrites the value because it should have just returned 9, but it did not. How would you keep that the same? I'm curious. It's like a question mark. What does that mean? Nope. Yeah, I'm not actually sure. Because the way the compiler is going to read the code, it's going to read it left to right. Maybe if we returned it the other way. Highly doubt this was going to work. Yeah. That is a good question. It's got to be something with undefined. There we go. Okay. I don't know why null was doing that. I bet you if I called in my instructors, they wouldn't know. Well, the only thing I can think of is null is reserving a place in your memory. So when we say null, it means that there's a place reserved in your computer's memory for nothing. So I think what was going on is the compiler was reading null as actual value, and so it was just changing it to 0. That's what I think was happening here. I'm sure. Yeah, since null is an object, technically, I think that there was something going on where the computer was just evaluating it to 0 instead of null, which I didn't want it to do, but JavaScript is going to do it anyway. Whereas undefined strictly means that there is no place in memory reserved for no value. So that's the that's the difference between undefined and null. Is null is since there is a place that we're specifically referencing, that is going to be considered an object. It's going to be considered a value. Since we're passing in undefined, that literally means that there is nothing here, there is no address, there is no value, there never will be, and there never has been. That's the only thing I can think of, is that null somehow is changing into a 0, but I wouldn't have anticipated that. So there you go. If you want to pass in an initialized left side variable, you have to do undefined in the call. I didn't even know that. So glad we were able to figure that out on our own. And you guys kind of saw a little bit of more of my like problem solving process, right? It was kind of like, oh, well, this didn't work. Let's try this. Oh, that's interesting. Let's try this. Let's try that. Unfortunately, it seems like everything is gone, but you could see I tried just leaving it with no comma. I tried putting a null, and then it worked, but then it didn't work how I expected it to. So then I started thinking. I console logged it, and then I arrived at undefined. So again, just like that brute force mentality of where you're just constantly trying different things over and over. Like don't keep trying the same thing over and over. But if you're trying, like I tried leaving it blank, I tried a question mark, I tried 0, I tried null. Like I wasn't just spamming the same thing over and over. If you can find a way to change your functions or your answers in a meaningful way, just keep trying to solve the problem that way. I think that's probably the best way right now. And you'll come to find that the answer will open itself up to you a little bit more doing it this way. I think it's easy to kind of look at an enormous problem and just kind of like deer in the headlights lock up, right? Like if I came to here and I was like, I don't remember what mean is, and you're just like sitting here and you're staring at it, like you're not going to get anywhere. Worst case scenario, right? Like if all you can even think to do is something like this, that's better than nothing, right? We still get our numbers back, and I'm not on fire because I failed the test, right? So this gives us a little bit of a better idea of the data we're working with, right? So if all I did was just come into this function and console log numbers, I can come in and comment, and now I have a direct reference to exactly the data I'm working with. It's an array of numbers, and that is the first thing that it's going to throw into my function. Expected undefined to equal 15. And there we have our answer. See, so all I did was console log, and we're already like a few steps ahead. So now we know that we're going to be getting an array of numbers, and it's going to have 10, 10, 15, 20, 20, and it should evaluate to 15. So at this point, if I didn't know what mean was, I would look it up. For us, luckily right here, it's been provided. So the mean is the average number found by adding all data points and dividing by the number of data points. Cool. I always get that one mixed up with median. So I would have had to come here and and look this up regardless. So yeah, mean is what we all consider universally, I feel like, the average. But obviously there's different ways of averaging numbers. So all we have to do is come in here. We'll have a variable to accrue total value. And then we're just going to do, let's see. We could actually just do like really simple, like in the sake of keeping things simple, I'll do a while loop. Just remember you could lock up on these. So what I'm going to do is var I equals 0, while I is less than numbers.length. It's a little shorter, but it's dangerous. Just keep that in mind. Numbers at I to accrue total value plus equals numbers at I. Now, if I ran this, my computer would blow up. So we're going to do what the for loop normally does for us, and we're going to increment I. So this is exactly what a for loop does, essentially, under the hood. Right here we have our exit condition, right? Well, let me start at the top. So here is for let I equals 0. Here's our exit condition. While I is less than the numbers.length, I plus plus, right? Pretty much the same thing. Array.length, right? I'm doing the same thing in here, it's just a little different. I'm still declaring the variable. As a matter of fact, to keep it in line, I'm so used to typing in for let, so we could do let I equals 0. And this is how in my mind I conceptualize this phrase too. While this is true, while this middle statement is true, it's going to keep running. So if, you can think of it almost as an if statement as well, if I is less than numbers.length, then do this. If, and it's going to keep asking that question, right? So in a while loop, it's not the same thing as an if statement, right? So while I is less than numbers.length, do this operation, and then we're going to increment our iterator. So that way we will eventually hit a point where it's no longer less than numbers.length. Now again, this is kind of scrappy. Using while loops can crash your browser, but it's never going to crash your PC. So hopefully this works. Kind of just threw that together. undefined, because I'm not returning. Return to accrue total value. I don't know why I named that so stupid. I'm just gonna, it's an accumulator. But obviously its purpose is to accrue the total value. But just for simplicity, we'll just rename it accumulator. This is an accumulator pattern. Oh, and I'm not dividing.
You have another accrued total value under the
Oh,
while.
you're. And if I was working on an IDE, it would have told me that. I probably would have sat here for hours trying to figure out what the problem was if you didn't tell me that. So thank you. And you can include expressions in your return statement. If it makes you feel better, you can wrap it in parentheses, but that's not going to change anything in this instance. Like I said, that doesn't change anything. Return isn't really observed by PEMDAS, so if you have like any sort of PEMDAS operation on the right side of return, it's going to evaluate that first. So you don't need to worry about it like returning accumulator and then like dividing return by numbers. See, it still works. So again, the very first thing I did was console log. I realized it was an array, so I knew that I could use array methods if it was necessary, and then it also told me in the test down below that it should equal 15. So all I did was copy and paste this up in a comment, and that didn't break the test. It completely ignores the comments. So now I had a visual aid of being able to understand and know what my end goal was and what I was working with. So I figured we would probably need an accumulator. It's not explicitly required, but it's definitely the easiest way. And then instead of doing a for loop, I decided to change it up and I did a while loop. But again, please remember to change your exit condition inside the loop in some way. So like if this was while I, let's see, while I does not equal false, then you would have to have something in this loop that changes it to false. So in a while loop, you can have an if statement as well. So you could say if accumulator, well, no. It would probably be something like if numbers at I plus 1, remember I is an integer, we can do mathematical operations with I inside these brackets. If numbers at I plus 1 double equals undefined, I equals false. So while this is true, I does not equal false, right? Okay, so yeah. It's one of these ways. My brain, I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, so I'm trying to figure this out, but hopefully you guys get what I'm saying. If we hit a point as we're looping through the array, so like right here is 0, so I is 0, but what's I plus 1? It's 1, right? So even though we're actually at this point on the array, we can check this point, right? So then down here, if we just pretend like I still had I plus plus, then I would be 1, and then we would check I plus 2, or pardon me, 1 plus 1, and we would check that. So essentially what I'm arriving at is once we finally get to the end of the array, we'll check the end of the array plus 1, and that'll give us undefined. So that's how you could write a conditional like this, where you're saying if the array at the index plus 1 ever equals undefined, which means you've stepped out of the bounds of the array, you're not going to have something undefined in an array. It's a reference type. Again, undefined is no memory. In order for the array to store something, it needs memory because it's referencing something. So outside of the array is undefined. So if we are at this final point and we step out, that's undefined. So even though we're never actually hitting that point, because we're just essentially iterating over wherever the array is at that point, since we can do mathematical operations in brackets, that allows us to check for where the end of the array is. And then once we hit that check and we realize that we're at the end of the array, then we can change I to equal true. And then coincidentally, we can loop through an array without even needing to necessarily set I to an integer. Let me see if I can't do this real quick. Whoa. Calm down. Oh, HTML. Okay. So console.log, well actually let's do a variable. We'll do a variable test array equals an array of elements, and then we'll do var, var I equals false. While I equals false. I'll need an accumulator too, right? Var accumulator. I don't know why I always have trouble spelling this word. I spell it all the time. So while I is equal to false, we are going to throw another bracket before I forget. We are going to take the accumulator and have it plus equals to the test array at, oh, we do need an integer because I can't throw I in there. Well, okay. I will change this to stopping condition. While stopping condition is false, we're going to add and then var I equals 0. It turns out we do need that, so we can throw that in there. Finally, we do if test array at I plus, oh, I miss using an IDE, plus 1 equals undefined. So used to just hitting enter. Almost done. Stopping condition equals true. Oh, I should probably console log something. So it worked, right? I just ran that code. I don't have any console logs. Let's see. Let's console log the accumulator before it gets any value. Oh, and you know what? Where does this close? Yeah, how did that work? While the stopping condition equals false, if the test array equals undefined. Oh. Wait a minute, what? If test array at the index plus 1 equals undefined, then stopping, I thought I just wrote this. Condition, I did, it's up there. True. Okay, this is super spaghetti code. Let me separate this out, make this a little easier to read. So up here I have all the variables I initialized just to show you guys this example of how we would write a while loop safely, and if you didn't want to necessarily do it the traditional way, we have while the stopping condition is equal to false, we are going to console log the accumulator, and then after that, after we console log, we are going to have the accumulator equal to the value at test array at whatever the index is, but inside of the while loop. So I need another brace. There we go. Inside of the while loop, we have a conditional where we're asking if the index plus 1 spot, so one more over to the right, is equal to undefined, then the stopping condition is going to be true. And since this is inside the loop, which is specified, if I click on this final one right here, I can see that this lights up. So everything inside here is inside the loop. Since we're setting our stopping condition to true inside the loop, I know that this is more than likely a safe while loop. Still doesn't want a console log, and it keeps returning. Anyway, obviously I'm not crashing my browser. I don't know why it keeps erasing what I do, but that's how you could do another for loop if you wanted to. Oh, maybe I did do something. Yeah, I think the first time I ran it, I forgot the second brace. Luckily for us, it was only in that tab. So there you go. That's what happens when you mess up your while loop. You got to close your tab. It's awful. Okay. Anything else you guys want to go over? Maybe like, do you want to go over functions, arrays, objects, bracket notation, dot notation? Let's see. Because we have, what I was planning on doing is kind of touching up the rest of our JavaScript this week, and then we could sort of ease into HTML towards the end of the week, and then the following week would be like HTML, CSS, and all that, since it's all very tightly knit. And then finally, the last week would be like Ajax and stuff. So we already figured this out, got that down. So we already did our first week, right? So we're good there. On the second week, the one we're on, I was thinking of some more JS towards the beginning, and then later on, if we feel comfortable with that, then we can move on to HTML/CSS. Then the third week, we can just do HTML/CSS, and then the fourth week we could do, and then like maybe if we have time, Ajax with DOM. Again, those are kind of hand in hand. And then Ajax /DOM. And I think that'll be your last week. So I think I deleted everything. So we have this week, the following week, and then the last. Yeah, so we have 3 more weeks. Everybody on board? Does that sound good? Do you want to jump into the HTML now? Okay, cool. So I guess in preparation for HTML, let me think. What would be like a good, let's see, accumulator exercise. Maybe I could show you guys how to do the harder ones. That's so easy for me. And then watch, I'll try it and I'll mess it up. I'm going to use ES6. There you go. So this is called ES6. ES6 also introduces ternaries as well as classes. We are not going to talk about classes. They're really, at their core, objects. It's just an extension of JavaScript objects. So ES6 introduced a couple new functions to JavaScript, and this was way before even me. I think so. This was like 2015. I started coding like last year, a little earlier last year. So I've only known JavaScript with ES6, to put that in context. So I didn't get to experience this being new. That being said, you probably won't see this in a lot of legacy code because obviously this came out in 2015. And that's EMCA script 2015, right? Yes. So see how it says ECMA script 2015, so that's when it came out, and we're talking about ES6. So here, this is what ES6 allowed us to do. Let, right? Kind of crazy. I definitely take that for granted. I can't imagine not having let. So const, another one, which is like what? Arrow function, so that's what I just showed you. See this arrow? Ta-da! We're creative at naming stuff. That's an arrow function. Classes, again, they're just extensions of objects. Really not that important right now. They're going to be important if you want to get into like industry frameworks like React, Angular, or Vue. Right now, that's not really what we're doing, so don't worry about it. Default parameter values, I showed you guys that. So I didn't know that was an ES6 thing, but pretty much that's when you would come into your function and say like num1 equals this, right? That would be initializing your parameters, or as they put it, default parameter values. And then they added array.find, array.find index. I don't know why you would need that, because should be able to just put it in a bracket next to it. Maybe it's like finding the index of a word. So you put in like banana and it gives you back the index of banana or something. Oh, it shows examples. Default parameter values, yeah, there you go. Oh, there we go. Why is 10 if not passed or undefined? So yeah, needs to be undefined if you want to pass in the left parameter if it's initialized. Find, return value, okay. That one's a little more technical. That one's a little more technical. Yeah. Cool. So there you go, ES6. In case you forgot, the reason I brought that up is because I'm doing this new way. I thought ES6 was ternaries as well. I need to look into that. Let's actually see if that was ES5. Huh. Trailing commas. Oh, interesting. Okay. So I don't know when they were introduced then. This technically isn't true. This is an array. The reason you never see us actually typing out the data type like that or integer number is because with a capital letter it changes it, and with how JavaScript acts where it just kind of changes things behind the scenes on you, I don't think it's a good idea to name your variables strictly after data types, because if something happens and you're not aware where you accidentally say like, you know, this parameter coming in should be capitalized, then it just completely breaks and changes everything. So that's why you see typically in examples, instead of putting string, they put str. Because then, even if that capitalizes, see, it doesn't actually call the constructor for that data type. And when I say constructor, it's literally what it's doing. When I say string with a capital letter, you see I messed it up. It turns red when I type in string with a capital letter because there's these objects in JavaScript called constructors, and that's what this is right now that we're looking at. This is what is essentially being called whenever you declare a string under the hood in JavaScript. So if we wanted to, we could get super into constructors. Again, these are kind of less important, but if I wanted to go to like array constructor, oh, I just realized, okay, JavaScript, thank you. So that would be the constructor. And there's going to be a ton of, so you can see the function itself is calling native code. It's telling you here that this is like a innate part of JavaScript. It's the native code of JavaScript. Strings, numbers, arrays, they threw them all in here. Wow, thanks guys, that helps. Okay, but basically what's going on is array.constructor was called when he called, so I guess that's what this is trying to show, is this constructor is actually creating fruits. So it's kind of a misnomer. You have to actually kind of read this right to left. So the constructor is an object with methods that specify what the data is. In this instance, we're using the array constructor, and this is a bad example. It should just say array. It should just be like this, like array.constructor. door. See how it changes colors? So then this would be equivalent to when the computer is like, or we're like, right? There's a little bit more going on, but this is why we don't want to use the actual name of the data type, and that's why we always shorten it, because we don't want to run into problems where we're messing around with the constructors, because that'll just throw a ton of errors in your face. All right, so we're ready. We're going to do ARR, short for array, and all I'm going to do is say var copied array is equal to R, and then while for let I equals 0, while I is less than the array dot length 5 plus plus. Now I can do, wait, what am I trying to do? Do I need to copy it? I don't think so. Maybe. I said this was going to be easy. Copied array at I times equals 2. Return copied array. So even though I'm iterating over this array, I'm not sure if this is necessary, but I just want to make sure that I'm storing the variable of the copied values. Technically, we don't need that, but I just want to try this first. Okay, returns an empty array. You didn't say that. Okay, and doubles every number. So double numbers is not defined. I didn't know it was going to be called double numbers. Again, these tests can be frustrating. I wouldn't get too frustrated if you start to run into problems like this, because again, these tests are written by humans. Not everybody's perfect, and you don't want to waste a lot of time sitting here banging your head against the table when all they give you is example, and then I try to do the problem, and they're like, by the way, we forgot all this stuff above. It's kind of like, I don't know, that could have probably been written a little bit, right? So don't feel like you're terrible at coding or anything like that just because you know, the console explodes with errors when you thought it was a simple solution. It's probably the curriculum, so don't worry about that. Once I talk to everybody, we will have this checkpoint available. I would hope that you guys would be able to access this and start working on it. It doesn't need to be done necessarily by the end of the week or anything like that, but this is really good for practicing objects, what's it called? Accessing values in objects. It's a really great test. So if you wanted to test yourself, this is a great one. So here it says return the value 4.63 from store 1. Up here, you guys haven't seen this yet because we haven't been working with Node. This is the other screen? What just happened? Okay. Right up here, this require keyword, this is specific to Node. So I will add everybody to GitHub tonight, and then maybe tomorrow we can do all of this together, just so that we're all on the same page. I didn't realize this used Node, but all you'd have to do is install Node. As a matter of fact, that should be the number 1. Yeah. I would definitely recommend the older one if you're not sure, for obvious reasons. But really, all you got to do is install it, and it's part of your system. Yeah. Then you'd unpackage, unzip the pack, and then the way you can tell if it's properly installed, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code. That's my preference, but you can use whatever. If I come into my terminal and I type in node-v, it tells me my version right here. So now I know I have Node installed. That's all you got to do. And then if I type in npm, that's Node Package Manager. And so this is what allows Node, which is essentially JavaScript being turned into C. It allows Node to use other modules. What are modules? They're just files. So let's go to a good one. Let's go to like cookie index.js. So they're using the MIT license. Once this, I don't know why this is running so slow. Here they're using regex. It looks like really hard to read, but if you were curious as to what this is, it's spelled right there. Why is my computer running so slow? Oh, I had my C# open still. That would probably help, and my Java. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. That should help. Get out of here. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So, regex is, as far as I can tell, when you make your code as hard to read as possible, but it's this right here, regex. Regular expression. It has to do with like Unicode and different ways of. So this says pair split regular expression. I'm guessing this has to do with their encoding and decoding. Obviously, this is like super advanced. This is like industry grade JavaScript, right? So this is just minified. I don't see people ever writing regex. It's usually, it comes from a minifier, which obfuscates your code. Minification. In computer programming languages, and especially JavaScript, it's the process of removing all unnecessary characters from your source code without changing its functionality. So that's essentially what's going on here, is they're using these weird regular expressions with the Unicode characters to help with their encoding and decoding. Yeah, so regular expression to match the field. They show it being used in here. I don't understand what the heck is going on. But if we scroll down, we can see very similar things, right? If the type of string does not equal string, then throw a new error. The argument string must be a string, right? This is like industry grade code. This is a module that a lot of people would use. Pair, substring, blah, 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 blah. So that's a module. So when I typed in npm, that's all I did was I was just checking to make sure Node still had its package manager for modules, which is right here, see, modules. So we will get into that tomorrow. Once everybody is on the same page, we have the GitHub all set up and everything. I can lead you guys through that tomorrow. But just to give you an idea of what to expect, you have that there. Regular expression. All right. So yeah, and then tomorrow we'll also go over this. So wherever you're at with this curriculum, just continue chugging on through. I will be online until probably about 10, and then I'm here all day tomorrow. So if you get stuck, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to help you out as long as I have the time available. Other than that, I thought this one was really crazy. Oh, this one. This is actually an interview question. I have heard of people getting asked this in interviews. It's a very renowned problem, I guess you could say. It's called FizzBuzz, and it revolves around modulo. For multiples of 3, you know, if something equals 0, right? For the multiples of 5, 5, right? But 3 and 15, the lowest common denominator is 15. You know, what would that do? Modulo is the key to solving this one. So I'll give that to you guys. But that's not actually the problem I wanted to go over. I actually think this one is pretty, The hardest part is setting up your if statements. This is going to be the hardest one. Is you're going to have one if statement, you're going to have an else if statement, and then you're going to have an else. Maybe. Just side note, you don't need a final else. If you wanted to do this, you can. There doesn't always need to be else. That's not like a rule. As a matter of fact, you don't need else ifs either. If you just want if, that's fine too. So don't feel like you always have to put an else just because you have an if. That's not true. You can just do ifs or else ifs and not finish it off with an else and you're fine. Now maybe you'd want to put like a console log in your else because you should never get there, right? So like if I did something like if, else if, and then that was good, that was all my code, maybe I still would want, yeah, like an else here, and I would do like console.log, you know, variable name, whatever, right? To figure out like what the heck just happened, why did it hit this last condition that it shouldn't have hit, right? So this is probably going to be the biggest part. This is really all you're doing, right? Like I'm kind of giving it away. If modulo 3 equals 0, then console.log is, right? Something like that. I don't want to give that one entirely away. I think that one's a fun one, but it's going to be pretty similar to that. And then over here, I actually have a working example of a negative for loop for you guys. So I'm back. I'm going to explain this one line by line though. So this was really hard for me. I was actually really struggling with this, and I was confused as to how to solve it. Luckily, I finally figured it out. So I will tell you guys how I figured it out. Initially, I was trying to do this without an accumulator. That's what this is right here, and I found it to be very hard. So what kind of tipped me off to that is I started really thinking about, before my for loop started at 0, my I equaled 0. So you can see here, instead of setting I to 0, I'm setting it equal to the string length minus 1. Can anybody tell me why? Why do I want to set my iterator starting at the top of the string equal to the length minus 1? Yes, exactly. We're not talking about the length. We're talking about the indices. And the indices for anything in JavaScript starts at 0. So if I have a number for, or the word for rather, F-O-U-R, if I say dot length on this, that equals 4. But if I try to look up 4 at the 4th indice, well, let's see, we have 0, 1, 2, 3. Undefined, right? Now we're outside, we're not where we want to be. So that's exactly correct. You have to subtract it from 1 because it's the index, not the length. So if this was the word for, F-O-U-R, this would get us to R because now I is equal to 3 rather than 4, even though that 4 is 4 letters long. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Yeah, so you can kind of maybe tell a little bit of a pattern here. Before, I was doing it so I was equal to 0, and then I was doing while I is less than the length of the string. So I flipped that around, right? Instead of starting I at 0, I started at the end of the string. And then I say while I is greater than 0, because we're going from the top down, so if I is greater than 0, keep running. And then instead of plus plus, I just do minus minus. So we're starting at the end of this string, and just to recap here, what we're trying to figure out is if the string only ends in 3 or more exclamation marks. If it has 4 at the end but 1 in the middle, it doesn't count. So I created this negative for loop because I realized that, well, if I have an accumulator and we're counting from the end to the front, then I know that I can just count the amount of exclamation points, and then once I have 3, I know that's at least hitting that criteria of being an intent string. So what I did was I said the string at I, now keep in mind, at this point it's at the end of the string. It's not at the beginning. So I'm asking, is there an exclamation point? Like getting straight to it, right? If the string at the last position is an exclamation mark and my accumulator is not equal to 3, then we're just going to increment. So I'm counting the exclamation marks, right? We're starting at the end of the string while I is greater than 0. If we run into an exclamation mark and point counter does not yet equal 3, then just increment it. So eventually this is kind of like the while loop, right? Eventually we're going to get to a point where this isn't going to be true because it is going to equal 3. So I kind of messed this up here. This does work, like doing this right there, but really the better way would be strictly equals to 3 because in my code there is no way that point counter could ever be more than 3. So it kind of doesn't make sense to check if it's going to be greater than or equal to because I literally set it so that once it hits 3, it can't increment anymore. So in the sake of best practices, I'm going to change that to 2 equal signs, but it does work with a greater than. You're just never going to hit that greater than evaluation. Okay, so all I did here, it looks very confusing, convoluted. I just started at the end of the string and I counted 3 exclamation points. And I stored the amount of exclamation points I saw in this accumulator I declared on line 2. So, as I was saying before, all I have is an if and an else if. I don't need an else. As a matter of fact, I don't need this statement here either. This one I thought was helping me. It turns out it wasn't doing anything. This is all you need. So right here, else if, so right off the bat we're checking, does point counter equal 3? We do not want to execute this unless point counter is equal to 3. We're going to say if, now let's ignore this for now, because that kind of confuses and convolutes things. If we take the string and we call dot slice, it takes in 2 parameters. The 2 parameters are where you want to begin the slice, and the second parameter is where you want to end the slice. So in this instance, if we were talking about 0 and 2, and this was 4, just, 4, we would start at 0, which is F, and then we would go 1, 2. So now we would be talking about FOU. That is what slice is doing in this instance. So I'll go back. So what I'm doing is I'm taking the string, I'm slicing it, I'm grabbing that current point, and I'm starting at the beginning, the 0 index, and then I'm stopping at wherever I is. The reason this is so significant is because I've already confirmed that there's 3 exclamation points at the end of the string at least. With that known, we can check, okay, does anywhere else in the string dot include an exclamation point? Now, I didn't realize this when I actually wrote this, but this is actually kind of interesting because if there's 4 exclamation marks, well, let's see. If I count 3, right, I get to 3. I'm finally hitting this point. So it is 3. But if I take this string and I slice it from where I'm currently at down to the beginning of it, and it still has an exclamation mark. So, for example, I'll just do it in here. Like, that would be okay, right? We would hit this and that would return true. We'd be fine. Happy days. However, if it was like this would evaluate to false. And let me just throw this back on now that we've gone through that. The reason it would be false is because I'm saying the point counter is equal to 3, cool. So we enter if the string sliced from our current position, which, is whatever the index is at this current point in the loop, from the beginning of the word to wherever we're at in the loop, if that remainder of the word does not include, right here, the exclamation mark does not include the exclamation mark. That's what this, I just realized it's really confusing. This blue exclamation mark is the not operator. This is what's making this whole statement evaluate to false. That's why it kind of looks confusing. If I just do this, I'm asking, does this string from the current point include an exclamation point? Yes? Cool. Then it's true. It'll execute the code inside the curly braces. I don't want that. I want it to be not including any additional exclamation points. So that's why I passed this exclamation point at the beginning here. So if there's 4 exclamation points and I'm just checking from where we're currently at, so I've counted 3, right? 1, 2, 3. This isn't going to be true because now here's I, and I'm going to slice the string from there out. So here's I, it's at the end still, but we still have an exclamation point in the string. So what happens is all we do is hit the end of the loop right here. If I click on this curly brace, at the end it gets highlighted. So everything within this highlighted area is occurring within my for loop. So what happens when this evaluates to false, when I eventually get to this point where it's like, hey dummy, you still have an exclamation point right here, it's going to evaluate to false, but then it's going to decrement again. So what's going to happen is instead of I being here, it's going to move over and it's going to be there. So then this statement runs again because we still have 3 exclamation points. That didn't change. But now we're going to check again. Does the string from 0 up to I include any exclamation points? No. Well, yeah. Boop. Yeah, blank. 5, and then I is at the end. This evaluates to true because now we have evaluated the end of this string. We've discovered that all of the exclamation points are at the end. Once we got through all of the exclamation points, we check the rest of the string. Does this have any other exclamation points elsewhere? No? Great. Return true. If none of these conditions are ever met, then we're just going to return false, flat out. This actually isn't even in the loop. It's outside of the loop. So this is in here, and we're just asking over and over, hey, are we done checking all the exclamation points? Are we done checking all the exclamation points? Once we're done, then we're going to see, does the string include anywhere else an exclamation point? If we're not at the end, it will evaluate to false. So like for instance here, come on, insert mode, what the heck? If this was the string, then we would get to this point where I is here, and then we would ask the question again, where we say, else if the counter is 3 and the string does not include exclamation point, we get here. And so we continue moving down, consistently getting errors, and then, let's see. Sorry, the air conditioning is super loud in here. It does, yeah. It does. Yeah, as long as it works, right? Okay, I messed up. The reason this works is because right here, when we hit this point, we check if this does include, and then when it returns false, it's going, oh man, I'm trying to think of a good way to explain this. It's kind of escaping me right now. Let's see. I've been like chatting your heads off. Let's take like a 5-minute break, and we can come back at 7:57. While I figure this out. Huh. So the reason it worked is because their test had an exclamation point at the beginning. So technically this isn't the most perfect result, but it does the job. The only reason this works is because the only one they test this with, the invalid one, is with an exclamation point at the beginning. If this was anywhere else, this solution actually would not work. But this was really hard. I had trouble with this one. As you can see, it looks pretty crazy. So I figured I might as well go over it, get it on recording, just so people have that as a reference. But yeah. Sure, I'll take a look. Yeah, so the char at I, the character at I, is essentially just saying the string at I in brackets. I don't know when that method was introduced, but if I console.log, what's that? Yeah. Yeah. I do one, I do. So this is the same as bracket notation. And you can see here I just got the same thing. Just as a little tip, just so you know. But yeah. So it's saying we're starting 4 down because we already know that it needs to end with 3 exclamation points. Oh yeah. So the reason that works is that it's correct. And I'm curious if your solution is really good. Never thought of it. That's a good solution. But I think the reason that one works is this right here. I think it fails immediately. Because these are the 3 strings it seems to be testing. So we have hello, we have intense strings, and then we have exclamation mark intense, exclamation mark strings. So your for loop is starting here, and so you're asking if I is an exclamation mark and then I plus 1 is not an exclamation mark, return false. And so on this one, that's what ends up returning false, and then the other 2 are returning true. Just so you know. Yeah. Yeah, so like right off the bat. Yeah. Hey, that's good enough, right? Good enough is good enough. Very cool. Okay. So we don't need to worry about the checkpoint. Let's do some code styling. Code density, padding, white space. This is all very suffix. No. It's like light reading material. What the heck is this, John? Okay. Do I have access to this? Okie dokie. There we go. Fix the JS styles. Got it down. Now he knows. Now he knows that I know that he knows that this doesn't do anything. So that being said,